What if I told you that one man, a humble preacher, shaped the hearts and decisions of the most powerful leaders in the world? Billy Graham wasn't just an evangelist. He was a trusted advisor to U.S. presidents for over 6 decades. From guiding Richard Nixon through scandal to inspiring George W. Bush's transformation, his influence on the White House was profound. Let's dive deep into 5 key moments where Graham left an unforgettable mark on American history. 1. The spiritual backbone of Eisenhower. How Billy Graham reinvented faith in politics. Billy Graham's journey into the White House began with Dwight D. Eisenhower, the war hero turned president, who led America through the early years of the Cold War. In the 1950s, America was at a crossroads, facing threats from communism abroad and moral struggles at home. Eisenhower, though not outwardly religious at the start of his presidency, saw the need to reinforce the nation's faith as a counterbalance to the Soviet Union's atheistic ideology. Enter Billy Graham. He was not just a preacher, he was a bridge between politics and faith, offering Eisenhower spiritual guidance that would shape his leadership. It was Graham who urged Eisenhower to emphasize God in his speeches, leading to iconic moments like the addition of "Under God" to the Pledge of Allegiance and the official recognition of the National Day of Prayer. Eisenhower sought Graham's advice during personal and national crises, including the tense moments of the Cold War, when nuclear threats loomed. Graham's impact on Eisenhower's presidency set the stage for faith to play a major role in American politics, a legacy that continues today. 2 is Nixon's closest confidant, the friendship that shook Billy Graham's faith. No president had a closer relationship with Billy Graham than Richard Nixon. The two shared a deep bond that went beyond political strategy. They were personal friends, often discussing faith, global issues, and morality. Graham supported Nixon's vision for America and even defended him publicly, believing in his leadership. However, this trust was shaken when the Watergate scandal erupted. Graham, who had privately counseled Nixon throughout his presidency, was devastated to learn about the corruption and deceit. He later admitted that he felt used by the political system and regretted being so involved in partisan matters. This moment marked a turning point for Graham, teaching him a powerful lesson about the dangers of intertwining faith too deeply with politics. Yet despite the scandal, he never turned his back on Nixon as a person, continuing to pray for him and even visiting him after his resignation. This relationship showed both the power and the peril of being a spiritual advisor in the White House. 3. The Reagan Revolution. How Billy Graham inspired the moral compass of a president. Ronald Reagan, known for his strong conservative values and emphasis on morality, often looked to Billy Graham for guidance. Their relationship was built on a shared belief in America's Christian foundations and the idea that faith should guide leadership. Graham's influence could be seen in Reagan's speeches, where he frequently referenced biblical principles and the importance of a moral society. During moments of national crisis, including the Cold War's height and the Iran-Contra affair, Reagan turned to Graham for advice, asking for prayers and wisdom on how to lead with integrity. One of the most powerful moments came when Graham privately counseled Reagan after the assassination attempt on his life in 1981. Reagan later admitted that he believed God had spared him for a purpose, a belief reinforced by Graham's teachings. This spiritual awakening deepened Reagan's resolve to govern with faith as his guide. Graham's impact on Reagan was not just political, it was deeply personal, shaping the way he viewed his role as a leader chosen for a higher purpose. 4. Bill Clinton's redemption. How Billy Graham preached forgiveness at the White House. The 1990s brought a new wave of political and personal scandals. And at the center of it all was President Bill Clinton. When the Monica Lewinsky scandal rocked the nation, Clinton faced public humiliation and political threats. While many turned their backs on him, Billy Graham did something different. He offered forgiveness. Graham publicly stated that everyone, including presidents, deserved grace and redemption. His message resonated deeply with Clinton, who later credited Graham with helping him navigate one of the darkest times of his life. Unlike political figures who saw the scandal as an opportunity for attack, Graham saw it as a moment for healing. He reminded Clinton that biblical leaders, from King David to Peter, had fallen but found redemption through faith. This act of grace not only strengthened Clinton's personal faith, but also reinforced Graham's role as a moral guide, not just for presidents, but for the nation. 5. The faith that changed George W. Bush's life. Billy Graham's greatest presidential influence, perhaps the most personal and transformative impact Billy Graham had on any president, was with George W. Bush. Before his presidency, Bush struggled with alcoholism and a sense of direction. In 1985, during a family vacation at Kennebunkport, Maine, he had a life-changing conversation with Graham. The evangelist spoke to him about faith, purpose, and personal transformation, a message that resonated deeply. That conversation became the catalyst for Bush's decision to quit drinking and commit his life to Christ. Years later, as president, Bush credited Graham for helping him find his path, stating that the encounter with Graham was the turning point that shaped his leadership and moral compass. Throughout his presidency, Bush frequently sought Graham's wisdom, especially after the September 11th attacks, when he needed spiritual strength to lead the country through its darkest hour. Graham's influence on Bush was not just political, it was deeply personal, shaping the man before he ever entered the Oval Office. 11. Harry Truman and the first presidential meeting that went wrong. Billy Graham's first meeting with a U.S. president did not go as planned. In 1950, a young and ambitious Graham was invited to meet President Harry Truman. Eager to impress, he and his fellow evangelists prayed with Truman in the Oval Office, then excitedly shared details of their conversation with the press afterward. Truman, a private man when it came to faith, was furious, feeling that Graham had violated his trust. It was a painful but valuable lesson for the young evangelist. He realized that his role as a spiritual advisor required discretion, not publicity. From that moment on, Graham kept his presidential conversations confidential, a principle that allowed him to become a trusted advisor to every president who followed. 12. Graham's role in the civil rights movement and his influence on Presidents Billy Graham was one of the few Christian leaders in the 1,950s who took an active stand against racial segregation. He insisted that his crusades be racially integrated, refusing to hold events where black and white worshipers were separated. His influence extended to the White House, where he urged presidents, including Dwight D. Eisenhower and Lyndon B. Johnson, to take stronger stances on civil rights. Graham worked closely with Martin Luther King Jr., even inviting him to pray at his crusades. And he personally encouraged Eisenhower to deploy federal troops to enforce school integration in Little Rock, Arkansas. While he was not always as outspoken as some activists wanted, his behind-the-scenes advocacy played a role in shaping the moral conscience of presidential leadership during the civil rights era. 13. The Cuban Missile Crisis, how Billy Graham helped Kennedy seek divine guidance during the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. President John F. Kennedy faced the most terrifying moment of his presidency, the possibility of nuclear war. Behind closed doors, Kennedy sought spiritual guidance, and Billy Graham was among the religious figures who urged him to pray and seek divine wisdom in handling the crisis. Though Kennedy and Graham were not as close as some later presidents, Graham's influence was felt as Kennedy spoke of peace and restraint rather than immediate retaliation. In the end, diplomacy prevailed, and the world narrowly avoided catastrophe. Graham later reflected that moments like these demonstrated the importance of faith in leadership, even in life or method decisions. 14. How Billy Graham's words shaped Jimmy Carter's presidency. As the first openly evangelical president, Jimmy Carter already had a deep personal faith but Billy Graham played a key role in encouraging him to use that faith as a guiding principle in leadership. Graham admired Carter's moral integrity and commitment to service, and the two shared many discussions about how faith should shape political decisions. When Carter faced crises such as the Iran hostage situation, he turned to Graham for spiritual support. Graham reminded Carter that faith is not about political success, but about doing what is right, even in adversity. Their friendship continued long after Carter left office, with both men working together on humanitarian projects and disaster relief efforts. 15. The assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. Billy Graham's call for healing. When Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated in 1968, the nation erupted in grief and anger. President Lyndon B. Johnson called on Billy Graham to help bring the country together through faith. Graham preached a powerful message of unity and reconciliation, urging Americans to embrace Dr. King's dream rather than turn to violence. He advised Johnson on how to use faith as a tool for healing during one of America's darkest moments. Graham's call for peace was heard not only in churches but also in the White House, reminding leaders that spiritual leadership was just as important as political action in times of crisis. 16. The Bill Graham and Richard Nixon White House services during Nixon's presidency. Billy Graham held private worship services inside the White House, offering spiritual counsel to the president, his staff, and even members of Congress. These gatherings were designed to provide moral and spiritual grounding for those in positions of power. While Nixon's eventual downfall in the Watergate scandal deeply hurt Graham, he never stopped praying for the disgraced president. Graham later wrote that he regretted not speaking out against Nixon's actions sooner, but believed that his role was to offer guidance, not political judgment. These White House services became a model for how faith could be incorporated into leadership, influencing future administrations. 17. The 9/11 attacks. Billy Graham's words of comfort to a nation in mourning after the terrorist attacks on September 11, 2001. America was in shock. President George W. Bush turned to Billy Graham for spiritual guidance as the nation sought to make sense of the tragedy. Graham was invited to lead the national prayer service at the Washington National Cathedral, where he delivered a powerful message of hope, unity, and resilience. His words brought comfort to millions of Americans, reinforcing the idea that in times of national crisis, faith can be a source of strength. Bush later said that Graham's counsel in those days helped him lead the country with clarity and resolve. 6. JFK in the meeting that never happened, a tragic what-if in history. John F. Kennedy was America's first Catholic president, and his faith was often scrutinized during his political rise. Unlike many of the presidents Graham advised, Kennedy did not have a deeply personal relationship with the evangelist. However, they did have a few private discussions on matters of faith and morality. One of the most haunting moments in their relationship came in 1963, when Kennedy, after attending the National Prayer Breakfast, asked Graham to walk with him outside for a private conversation. Kennedy wanted to discuss something serious, potentially his faith, spirituality, or even his concerns about the Cold War. However, Graham was suffering from the flu and not wanting to spread illness, declined, saying they would talk later. That conversation never happened. Just a few months later, Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas. Graham later reflected on this missed opportunity, wondering what Kennedy wanted to discuss and whether he could have offered him some comfort or guidance in those final months. It remains one of the most significant what-ifs in presidential history. 7. The Vietnam War crisis, how Billy Graham urged presidents to seek God's wisdom. The Vietnam War was one of the most divisive conflicts in American history, and multiple presidents, including Lyndon B. Johnson and Richard Nixon, struggled with its moral and political consequences. During this time, Billy Graham was a voice of wisdom, urging these leaders to seek God's guidance in their decisions. President Johnson, in particular, relied heavily on Graham's counsel. The war weighed heavily on his conscience, and he often invited Graham to the White House or his Texas ranch for private discussions. Graham encouraged him to find a way toward peace, emphasizing the Christian responsibility to seek reconciliation rather than prolong conflict. Despite his influence, Graham never dictated policy, he only advised. He later admitted that while he supported the leadership, he regretted not speaking out more against the war's escalation. His experience during Vietnam solidified his belief that while spiritual leaders can counsel politicians, they must be cautious about being drawn too deeply into political affairs. 8. The Ford years, bringing stability to a nation in crisis. When Gerald Ford took office in 1974 after Nixon's resignation, America was in turmoil. The Watergate scandal had shattered trust in government, and the nation was searching for moral leadership. Billy Graham stepped in as a steadying force, offering Ford the same spiritual guidance he had given to past presidents. Ford, a man of quiet faith, turned to Graham for reassurance as he made the controversial decision to pardon Nixon, an act that many saw as political suicide, but one that Graham saw as an act of Christian forgiveness. Ford later reflected that Graham's guidance helped him make peace with that decision, believing it was the right thing to do, even if it cost him politically. Graham's presence during this time helped remind the American people of the importance of faith, forgiveness, and healing. In a time of national crisis, he was a beacon of stability for both the president and the country. 9. George H.W. Bush and the Gulf War, a prayer before battle. When the Gulf War erupted in 1991, President George H.W. Bush faced one of the biggest decisions of his presidency: how to lead a military intervention in Kuwait while maintaining a moral high ground. Unlike some presidents who turned to political strategists first, Bush turned to Billy Graham. Before making his final decision to launch Operation Desert Storm, Bush invited Graham to the White House for prayer. The two men discussed the gravity of war, the cost of human life, and the responsibility of a leader to seek wisdom beyond his own understanding. Graham encouraged Bush to lean on his faith, reminding him that while war was sometimes necessary, it should always be pursued with humility and a desire for peace. Bush later described this moment as one of the most spiritually grounding experiences of his presidency. It was a testament to the fact that even in matters of war, faith played a central role in decision-making at the highest level. 10. The final farewell, how Billy Graham's death united political opponents. Billy Graham's influence on American presidents did not end with his life. It continued even after his passing in 2018. His funeral was one of the rare moments in modern history when political opponents put aside their differences to honor a man who had counseled leaders from both parties. Former presidents, including George W. Bush, Bill Clinton, and even Donald Trump, paid their respects, reflecting on the ways Graham had shaped their lives and leadership. It was a moment of unity in a deeply divided nation. Even in death, Billy Graham remained a bridge between opposing sides, proving that faith has the power to transcend politics. His legacy as a pastor to presidents will be remembered not just for the policies he influenced, but for the personal and spiritual transformations he helped foster in the world's most powerful leaders. 18. Graham's influence on the Supreme Court and moral legislation. While Billy Graham never directly lobbied for political causes, his influence on moral issues extended to Supreme Court decisions and legislative debates. Presidents often consulted him on issues like abortion, same-sex marriage, and religious freedom. Though he was firmly rooted in conservative Christian beliefs, Graham was known for his approach of engaging in dialogue rather than condemnation. His influence encouraged presidents to consider the moral and ethical dimensions of policies, reminding them that leadership was not just about law, it was about conscience. 19. Billy Graham's friendship with Barack Obama. Bridging generations, although Billy Graham was well into his 90s when Barack Obama became president, the two still shared a unique friendship. In 2010, Obama visited Graham's home in North Carolina, marking the first time a sitting president had come to see him instead of the other way around. The two prayed together, and Obama later spoke about how Graham's ability to bring people together, regardless of political ideology, was something he deeply admired. Despite their generational and political differences, their meeting symbolized Graham's lasting influence on American leadership. 20. The future of Billy Graham's legacy in presidential leadership. With Billy Graham's passing in 2018, the question remains, will there ever be another spiritual advisor with the same influence on the White House? His son, Franklin Graham, has taken on a similar role, but is more politically vocal than his father was. As America becomes more divided, the need for faith-based guidance and leadership is as important as ever. Billy Graham's legacy serves as a reminder that true influence comes not from political power, but from moral integrity, humility, and a commitment to higher principles. His impact on U.S. presidents will be felt for generations, proving that faith has a place even in the halls of power. Conclusion: Billy Graham, the spiritual advisor who shaped a nation. Billy Graham's role in American history was far greater than just being a preacher. He was a moral counselor, a bridge between faith and leadership, and a steadying voice in times of crisis. From Truman to Obama, his influence on presidents was a testament to the power of spiritual wisdom and governance. His story is a reminder that even in politics, faith can be a guiding force for unity, healing, and hope. The question is, who will rise to carry that torch in the future?